Ardashir, I did want to ask you, I know some people that have registered, they might have applications of their own where right now, they have end users that are accessing analytics inside of those applications today. If we're to think about, okay, our users' needs, maybe they have changed over the years. Maybe for some people, they've been using sort of the same solution for the last few years. How can we as product people take a look at our applications and determine whether they're actually meeting the needs of our users? Like if we were to go through sort of a audit process, if you will, how can we best do that? How should we think about that?
Yeah, I would imagine that you would even for analytics, you would do this in the same context that you would look at your application any other way. So if you're doing it, you should be asking some questions around the business drivers and metrics, and see if you can map that to whether it is related to the analytics in your application. Sometimes it is. So things that you may want to look at are we reducing customer churn, or is that something that's going up? Are we actually seeing a contribution in revenue overall that is coming, and we can tie that to the existence of analytics inside the application? Are we seeing improved win rates because the analytics in our application are more informative, they're more insightful, and they're helping users make decisions? Are we seeing an increase in user adoption from evaluation, for example, to purchase because of the impact that the analytics are offering to the business inside that application? Are we attracting new users because we have these great dashboards that are informative, and some new users can imagine what's the best way that they can actually use that to do their job? How are these analytics, for example, improving the overall user experience? Are people staying in the application longer? Are they more engaged? Are they interacting more with the dashboards and visuals that are in the application? Are we overall increasing customer satisfaction? There's obviously different ways to measure that. So those are some of the areas that you can take a look at and figure out if, one, there's a contribution from the analytics, if there is things missing from your analytics that could be helping your software application, and ultimately, how is it differentiating you, obviously, from your competition? Because that could be a key play in putting analytics, embedding analytics actually into enterprise software.
I love that. I love that you're bringing up value drivers, really, because sometimes it's not just that we're checking a box. It's not like, well, we know we have to have an analytics inside the application, and we have it, so the box is checked. It's more than that. Are we actually helping the end users? Is it actually contributing more revenue or more value to our business too? So yeah, if we can make a list of these things and actually start to really assess whether it is sort of moving the needle, that can be really useful. I'm glad you brought that up. You mentioned competition though. So and I think it would be very common where if we have an application and we're providing analytics to our end users inside of that application, our competitors, maybe they're doing the same thing. How is it possible to use analytics inside of our applications as maybe a competitive advantage or sort of a differentiator against competition? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, having it versus not having it is obviously going to be a competitive advantage if your competition doesn't have it, right? But what as far as how to use that, or how to get analytics in and be able to leverage it in a competitive way, I would imagine you want to start with customer requirements around analytics, and this all depends on how your customers are using your software, and how would the analytics help them, with the software that you are offering to them. So start with the customer requirements, and around analytics, this could be visuals, like charts, graphs, tables. It could be full-on dashboards. There could be requirements around security. There could be requirements around self-service, where end users can actually interact with the dashboards and visuals, or be able to drill down or ask questions from the data. There could be requirements around collaboration. They want to be able to share. They want to be able to notify. They want to be able to email an insightful piece of information to other people that they work with. And also, and this is something that we see now happening more and more, is that they might have data coming from multiple data sources, and they want to be able to combine that data, enrich the entire data set, and use that enriched data to be able to make decisions. And so that that becomes another piece around the customer requirements when it comes to analytics. So I would start there. And then once you have customer requirements, you can use that to drive the technical requirements for offering analytics inside an application. Because those customer requirements are going to take you to a place where you now have to make an assessment of, well, how do I meet all of these requirements? What are the technicals and the resources I need to get there? The other things to think about to make your analytics differentiated is that make sure, frankly, that they're insightful and that the users can rely on them to make decisions. So it's not just about giving people analytics; it's about giving people analytics they can use. That they can say, "I'm confident in the information that I'm getting from this dashboard, so I'm going to use that to make my decisions." If they don't have confidence in the information they're getting, then the analytics is really not worth that much. Just because it's there, it doesn't create value or really any kind of differentiation. Then another big piece of this, and this is all about having these the analytics in essentially inside the application to drive value that way, is that make sure it works within the workflow of the application, so that your customers are staying in your application, they're using it every day, they're engaged with the analytics, and they are able to kick off or trigger a decision or a workflow or an email or a notification or some other business process because of the data that they're seeing and the decisions that they're making around that. At the same time, I would say that one of the things that is aesthetically pleasing and people really like is that when the analytics are customized, especially when you're embedding them inside another application, when they're customized to match the look and feel of the host application, it makes it a lot easier to use from a user experience and user interface perspective. So that's definitely something to think about. And then over time, you want to refine these analytics and improve and enhance them so that there's an overall analytics experience that keeps customers engaged and coming back to your application for information.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, you hit on something I want to ask you about. As a quick aside, everybody, I see a couple questions coming in the Q&A. Keep those coming in. Those are good questions. I definitely want to ask Ardashir these questions at the end. So I love those. Keep them coming, please. But you mentioned something that stood out to me, and that it's one thing to provide the data within the analytics, within the interface, but then it's another thing for that data actually be used to make better decisions. And I'm curious, that's the goal with analytics, right? So we can make smarter, more data informed decisions. As product people, is there a way that we can help the end users more on this front? What's your take on how we might be able to basically help them make better decisions through this data that we're providing?
Yeah. So this is the the kind of the speech about going off analytics for the sake of analytics, right? So there's a few different ways you can provide the analytics, right? So you can use a single metric, right? You can have multiple KPIs and key performance indicators. You can have, again, a chart, a graph, a table, or some other type of visual. You can arrange an entire set of visuals into a dashboard, right? These are all ways to deliver analytics inside an application. The questions that you need to ask yourself is, well, what level of analysis does this data provide? When somebody looks at it, does this at all inform the end user, especially within the context of all the other information that I'm feeding the end user right now in this page of my application? Does it guide them towards making a particular business decision? Does it tell them or push them towards actually taking some kind of an action? So these are some of the questions that you need to ask when you decide to put a dashboard in place and the data that is being fed through that dashboard. What is this doing for my end user? Is it just a bunch of pretty charts and graphs, or is it something that they can actually use to make decisions, to make better decisions? So the data by itself is essentially just raw information. You need to shape that data and then focus it to make it insightful. So that data, presented in the form of analytics should answer the end user's questions. They should allow the end user to even ask more questions of the data, and this is where things like self-service analytics comes into play. And then end users that are armed with the right insights, then they have the ability to, explore the data, uncover additional answers, and they're going to be in a much better shape to make decisions, in fact, well-informed decisions from the data that they're looking at.
That's great. And I'm imagining that, in order for them to sort of easily dissect this information that we're providing, things like visualization, like that becomes super important. I wanted to get your take on where people usually make mistakes when it comes to visualization, though. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sure. So, with visualizations, obviously, the huge advantage they have is, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? And that's one of the beauties of using visualizations. But there are some common errors, and some of them are that the visual or the analytics doesn't give you the relevant data. So if you're talking about X and your visual is talking about Y, that data is not relevant. It's not going to be helpful. Then there is one that does not provide enough data to be informative to make a decision. So yeah, there is a visual there. It does have some data, but the data is really not sufficient for you to say it is enough for me to make a decision. Then there is the attempt at a single pane of glass where there is so much visualization. In fact, there's an overwhelming amount of data on the page, and it is then hard to actually get a coherent data story out of it. So yes, there is a lot of information. Some of it is contradicting each other. Some of it is not in context. So despite the fact that it's a great, huge dashboard with lots of visuals, it's not telling a story, so you really can't use it that much. The balancing act becomes giving the users the data that informs them, presenting it within the context of the rest of the information that they're getting at that moment in time, and then enabling them to make the decision and drive some business impact.
That's well put there. And all of these things, this is not easy to do, right? Like the things that we're talking about here, building analytics that do all of that inside of our applications for our end users, it's a challenge to be able to provide all that. So and I bring that up because I think when product people are faced with this challenge, they do have this sort of buy versus build decision, right? If they have the talent internally or have the capital to maybe hire talent, they could build all of this, but there are applications out there that they could quote buy, so to speak, or license. And to be fair, Logi Analytics is one of them. I'm just curious your take on how people should think about that buy versus build decision, and are there times where maybe building it on their own is the right call, or is it not? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, sure. So this is a topic is often quite heavily debated. My personal take on it is that I think that the idea of building analytics yourself could work if you're in a position where you have very simple requirements. Nobody's asking you really for a sophisticated technical needs. What they're looking for is simple graph, simple chart, small data set, no complicated requirements, and you can easily deliver that with a simple build. But if the expectation is that you are going to have to up-level those analytics over time, you need to be able to see around the corner, and there are some things to think about there. One is if your application is focused on, say, healthcare. You need to think about what is your core IP and what does this mean to your core IP if you go down the path of trying to build an application framework an analytics framework for your application, right? So what's, how much time is this going to consume and how much of your resources is it going to take away? Are you going to be replicating functionality that is easily available on the market and you can just go and acquire it? Is this relevant to your core IP, or is it just simply a distraction to your development team from where you're actually adding value to your business and to your customers? Is there an opportunity cost here to consider? When you make this particular decision. So that's the focus on your core IP is one part. Another part is time to market. So again, if the requirements are not simple, but rather sophisticated, you have to consider how long it's going to take me to build this, deploy it, then maintain it, then enhance it, then upgrade it, and make sure that it's working as expected all the time. That could be quite time consuming if there's a lot of moving parts, in the analytics piece of your application. If you've if you go a little bit further, there's a couple other points that I want to make here, Mike. If you want to go a bit further, yeah, so you do need to think about future proofing. And by this, I mean, imagine the app becomes very successful and people really like it. And in fact, they like the analytics too. So what's going to happen is immediately users are going to want more advanced features. And in the context of analytics, that's like things like self-service or integrated workflows or interactivity with dashboards at multiple different levels. So you have to think about this is where now I have to start looking at architecting in my app ways to be able to deliver these more advanced capabilities. And this is where a platform could be helpful for you to get access to some modern features. And then this way, you also don't spend a lot of time and also R&D resources around building it yourself. You're essentially just working with something that's already tested, that already has those capabilities you're looking for. And then finally, and I don't want to leave this out, is one of the things that to think about is security. Security is a big deal when it comes to working with analytics. Are you going to have multi-tenancy as a requirement? If you are, if you have an existing, security framework, is every component that you're using to build analytics going to work with that security framework? So that's something to think about. And then also licensing becomes something to also think about, because as you add analytics to your application, you want to make sure that when your application scales up, the cost of licensing doesn't kill you. And it's consistent with the way you license out your product to your customers.
That's awesome. And my sense is that because of all that, most people probably make the decision to work with a provider out there that does all those things, and that's all that they do. And so they probably choose the buy, so to speak, of the buy versus build. I guess because of that, my last question to you, before I open it up to the audience, is when people are looking at all the different options that are out there, and again, to be fair, Logi Analytics is one of them. There are others as well. Absolutely. How should they go through the process of making that evaluation and choosing the right partner for them?
Sure. So I can give you a few key areas to look at. Obviously this is different from company to company, but one of the areas, especially when it comes to embedding analytics into your existing application, is thinking about preserving your brand and your brand experience. So having the ability to completely customize the UI, UX, and branding experience of the analytics that you're embedding would be pretty important. You want to be able to match your dashboards and visuals to the rest of your application. You want to be able to do this globally. It doesn't make sense to do it, component by component and things like that. So you want things like custom themes, CSS, JavaScript, but you also want to have some granular control over things like colors and fonts and other things that makes your application user interface and user experience appealing. In addition, you want to think about plugins and APIs that are going to help you extend, customization of analytics in your application. The second part, I touched upon about this being important, is what happens with security. If you already have an existing security framework, can that development environment or whatever platform you choose use that existing security framework, or does it require you to come up with or use a proprietary security framework? That's going to mean more overhead, and it could limit the kind of frictionless experience you can have when you're going from application to application. Another part that you want to kind of be able to look at is, and this will happen with analytics as soon as people start to use them and like them, is what's the level of service that you can provide. End users, once you give them a chart, graph, or a dashboard, they want to interact with it. They want to drill into it. They want to pull information from it. They want to do crazy analysis to see like what if analysis and what happens if analysis. So what's the level of self-service? Is it fully restricted or is it open-ended? Can you customize it to match the skill set of your end users? And then can your users essentially take action without leaving your application, right? Leaving the application is a big problem because it reduces user engagement, which is a pretty key indicator for the success of that application. So are you able to provide an end-to-end analysis in your application If you're not, that could hurt adoption. Are there going to be integrated workflows that can trigger actions like send notifications or share content or schedule reports? Those are some considerations to look at. And these are some of the easiest ways to actually add value to end users. So if you do that, keeping the end user inside the application, one, it's going to improve the customer productivity. Two, it's going to boost customer satisfaction. And also, it's going to increase the time spent in your application, which is pretty important. That's what makes applications indispensable. The more people use them, the tougher of a time they have letting go of them, that's going to make it successful and indispensable. So I would say
that's super. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. And by the way, like while you were saying all that, even more questions were coming in. There's actually a lot of questions from the audience here. So if it's okay with you, I'd love to cut to some audience questions. We could get some answers for them too, if that's all right. Actually, this first one, this is an interesting one just because now so many people are living on mobile. The question is, if you have any suggestions for presenting analytics in a mobile app versus desktop application. And maybe I'll add, like, is it just as important to now consider, mobile alongside desktop? Like, we need to be thinking of these as having equal importance. So what's your opinion on that?
I mean, my personal opinion would be that it is. I mean, I probably spend just as much time on my mobile device as I do in my desktop environment. And I do get analytics from my mobile device as well, right? I mean, I go to any news site and I see a bunch of charts and graphs telling me what's going on with COVID and the election and things like that. So that's all analytics that I'm getting and consuming in a mobile environment. There's obviously platforms are capable of optimizing for mobile. Even the analytics for mobile. So my expectation is that you'll even see more growth in mobile because that segment is growing. But analytics in mobile is, essentially on the path to a must-have.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. Another question was asking about, I'll just ask the question. It says, is it worth rendering, quote, good enough data to users and then iterate to be better? And maybe I'll add to that. Or, is the expectation that whatever we're getting should be sort of top notch already? It's not this sort of MVP style. What's your answer to that?
Well, modern product management is all an iterative process. So if you take a look at it, especially if you're looking and working in agile environments, it's an iterative process. You have sprints that you do every couple of weeks, putting out a new updated version. It's not perfect, but it is viable. So that's to be expected. Nobody comes out of the gate getting it 100% right the first time. It's people that do. I'd be shocked and frankly floored if they did. But even if they did, that's not the norm. That's the exception. So the iterative process is the approach. It is very common in software development today. So with the analytics, you can apply the same thing, same methodology. And be able to just improve and refine your product over time, and the quality of the analytics will improve also over time.
Great. Let's see, take a couple more questions here. One of the questions is, what are some examples of best-in-class offerings in the marketplace that drive value through customer-facing analytics? And you mentioned this in the beginning. Actually, this was the very first question I asked. When I asked about this, you mentioned, hey, analytics should be driving value for us, and there's different ways it could drive value. Can you think of some examples of what you mean by that?
Well, from conceptually speaking, you're going to get the most value from analytics when it's there to inform you, when it's there to drive your decision-making process, when it's there to supplement some other information you're looking at, when it puts you in a position where you are now making decisions intelligently and you're confident in the decisions that you're making. The analytics has done its job. It's created its value, and you've realized that value. So from the context of decision making, the value of analytics comes down to how does it best inform, how does it best supplement the information you already have, how does it drive you to make one decision over the other.
Great. Let's see. This is a good question, and self-service is something that has become an expectation for some, but it's not necessarily the case in other verticals, so to speak. Question was, how can you talk about end user data literacy in creating a culture of self-service, moving from expert data analysts to building end users using data tools?
That's
So
right.
yeah, what is your take on that, Ardashir?
Yeah, so self-service, runs a spectrum. You can have self-service that is highly interactive, very rich in data. It allows the end user to do all sorts of things in terms of analysis. And this was, as the person who was asking the question was talking about, some people have very high data literacy, so they're able to go in there and figure things out for themselves in that self-service environment without having to come back to the visual author or the data authors, asking them for new reports or dashboards that are going to be able to answer their questions. They're capable enough to be able to do that. They have the skill set. The other side of the spectrum is that, for self-service, is that somebody might not need to do all of that. They may need to just click on one part of a dashboard. They only need 2 or 3 data points to be able to get their job done today. Now, they still want to be able to interact, but the interaction is far more limited. So ideally, you want to be in a position where if your product is going to offer self-service, that you are able to customize the self-service experience to match the skill set of that end user, whether it's a highly proficient analyst who wants to do data discovery and drill down and deep analysis, to somebody who just needs to look at a particular report and know what to do next.
Great. This question, it's a little, it's maybe a little outside the actual topic, but related in a way. So I'm going to ask it, and I know they're going to love your opinion on this one way or the other. It sounds like a big challenge for them. This person, they're a first-time customer development product manager, working for a healthcare platform startup. And they were wondering about advice on how to prevent the sharing of accounts to others in the same company, kind of managing seats. And I imagine, if we're offering analytics to our customers, maybe we're offering it on a per seat basis. I don't know. Do you have any good feedback for them on this particular challenge? I imagine this would be a big challenge for many.
Yeah, I think that this is a quite a challenge, and this is, I think, where some of the security capabilities come into play. So there are some security frameworks that really are good at blocking and the usage of seats between people within an organization because of the mechanisms they use to identify, who's using it, what kind of a device they're using it from, and what's unique to that device. I would do some research around how you can secure your licenses, but that would be the best advice I can give you. There are solutions out there to be able to minimize that type of usage. So I'd look into that.
Yeah, no, I did. That's great advice. Actually, it goes back to the whole, again, we're thinking buy versus build. If we're building it up ourselves, is security, one of those areas where we have this competitive advantage internally. If it isn't, we might want to think about that, because this is an issue that we're definitely going to have to deal with. We're kind of coming to the end of our time, so there might be a couple of other questions, but what I'd love to do is when I follow up with everybody via email, or I might have you follow up with everybody. One of the two of us will make sure that they get your info, Ardashir, because I want to make sure that if there are questions that we didn't get to or they think of after the session, they can turn to you and be able to ask that directly. Would that be okay with you?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to answer any question I can.
Awesome. Well, maybe what I'll finish with is sort of one last question to you, and that's, these sessions been active, for the past 40 minutes or so, and hopefully everybody's going to take this and remember every single small detail. Sometimes what happens, though, is we end up with that one or two things that we remember from something like this. And so if we were to sort of end with one or two sort of the big quick takeaways that you hope somebody would get out of a session like this, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, so since we're talking about, our topic is, getting value using data-driven applications, and creating more value that way, I would suggest that, you keep in mind that when you are looking at this from the context of delivering analytics inside your application, think about your end users and how they're going to use it, and give that a bigger weight of your thought than just the mechanics of building the analytics or creating that analytics. Figure out within whatever vertical you're in, is my end user going to be able to really leverage these analytics to make decisions, and be able to, and will that, keep them in my application, keep them coming back to my application, or what can I do with analytics to keep them coming back to my application? The more you get people to use your app, the more valuable your app is going to be. And if it becomes, again, like I was saying earlier, indispensable, then you kind of got it made as a product manager or a dev team.
Yeah, well, that's great. No, I appreciate that as a final takeaway. And Ardashir, I appreciate you making the time for this, and everybody, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day for this session. We'll be following up. I think the team at Logi Analytics will be following up. They have a load of resources right on their website. So regardless of whether you're looking for a solution, there's just great resources there to take advantage of. So I want to make sure that you get a link to that. I'll send you a link also to this video as well. And yeah, once again, just thank you for being a part of this, Ardashir.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Mike. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Awesome. Everybody have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.